All right, hello, my name is Colin and welcome to part 25 of Let's Build a 2D Platformer in the Godot game engine. In this tutorial, not so many series, we're building this 2D platformer video game. In this series, of course, you're building this game along with me from start to finish, step by step. If you've not seen the rest of the videos in this series and you've not been creating this game, you can start from the very beginning if you like. I'll put a link to this whole playlist here on YouTube up on the screen right now. In this video though, in part 25, we are creating a key that you can collect in your game that'll show up at the top of your screen in a little heads-up display once you've collected it. And once you've collected a key, you can then unlock doors in your game level that will teleport you to other doors in your game level. So in this video, we're creating a set of keys or a key that will unlock a set of doors. If that sounds good to you, let's go ahead and jump in. As always, if you like this video or if you end up learning something in it, please go ahead and click on that like button, subscribe, and that bell icon below. Let's go ahead and jump in. Okay, to start off this video, I'm going to go ahead and jump on over to my desktop because there I have a folder with all the game assets that I'm going to need to add, which are a few pictures of different states of a door. We'll have a couple of different states of a key for our heads-up display. We'll have a sprite for our actual key in our game, and we'll have some sound effects to add some liveliness into our game. So I need to get these sprites and sound files and copy and paste them into my project folder, which is right here. And in my project folder, I've been organizing all of my assets throughout this whole video series into an assets folder. And in that assets folder, I have different folders for different categories of assets. I'm going to go ahead and jump into my object folder. This is a folder of all my sprites for objects in my game. And I'm going to go and get and copy the 4 pictures, the 3 doors. So I'll select one, I'll hold Control, I'll select the next few, as well as the key right there with Control click. I'll copy, Control C, and then paste the sprites over here on the right. With Control V, of course. So now I've got the pictures of the door and the key. I'm going to jump back over to my assets folder in my project folder. I'll go into my heads up display, the HUD folder. And in that folder, I'll copy and paste the 2 key icons for the top of my screen heads up display. I'll select them, copy and paste into my project folder right there. And into my sounds folder, I will copy and paste the 4 sound files. I actually already have 2 of them in my sounds folder, but in case you don't have them and you want to make the same sounds as my key and door and all that, I will give them all to you in this game assets folder that I've given you for this video. So I'll select and copy those 4 sound files. I'll paste them over into my asset sounds folder. It's going to warn me that I already have 2 of them. Sure, so I'll skip these 2 that I already have, and the new ones that I didn't already have are Upgrade 1 and Pep Sound 1. So we've got all of the assets in my game project folder. I'll go ahead and close these windows and go back into the Godot editor, where if you saw really quick, it imported those assets, so we are good to go. In this game, I'm going to first add a key into my level right near my character. I recommend that you always make things close together, like my 2 doors are going to be right here at the start of my game, and my key will be right here, so I can just collect the key and then test it out really quick, okay? To make a new object in your game, of course, you should make a new scene for every object that you're going to want to reuse. So I'll go up here and press plus to make a new empty scene. And the root node of that scene is going to be, I'll press plus up here to add a new node as the root node in my new scene in the scene dock. I'm going to add an area 2D. An area 2D is simply a zone that something can enter, like your character can enter, and it's very good at detecting when an object or character enters it. So area 2D will be our first root node. I'm going to rename that node. I'll double click to key, and I'll press enter. I always name nodes with capital first letters, so capital K on key. Now, of course, when you make a new area, it doesn't look like anything, and it doesn't even have a zone, an area that detects when something enters it. So you have to add 2 child nodes. You have to add, I'll select this root node, a node for the keys sprite right here. I'll double click on Sprite to add it as a child of my root node. And I'll select my root node again because it needs a second child. It needs a collision shape. And so I'm just searching up here, by the way. I'm typing in the beginning of what I'm looking for, and then I'm finding it down here. Even though if you've been doing this whole project along with me, you should have all of these recent nodes here on the bottom left of this new node pop-up, and you should be able to find it down here, probably more quickly than what I'm doing by searching up here, but that's okay. So I'm going to add a new collision shape, not a polygon, and I'll double click. So now I have everything that I need pretty much. I'm going to select the sprite, and then over here in the inspector on the right of my screen, I have an empty texture slot. I'm going to go and grab from my assets folder and the object folder, which is right here. I'm going to drag in that key yellow picture into the sprite's texture. So I'll let go of it right there. And now we have the key. The key is a little bit too big, I think. So if I hold Alt and Shift and drag a corner, when you drag a corner and you hold Alt and Shift, it scales uniformly towards the middle and not just towards the opposite corner. And when you hold Shift, it doesn't let you stretch it or squash it like that. So I'm going to make the key a little bit smaller. In fact, with the sprite selected, if I go over to my transform properties, I'm going to change the key to be 0.75 and 0.75. That means 75% of its original size. Okay. My key needs a collision shape to detect when my character actually enters its zone. So my collision shape needs to have a new shape resource. So if I click in this little empty area, I can make a new rectangle shape, and then I can make that rectangle shape fit the key. Again, if I hold Alt on my keyboard, I can scale away from the middle of that and not just to one side. So I'll hold Alt and make it not quite as big as the actual key. I think that works for me. I'm going to go ahead and save this scene. So Control S on my keyboard, and because the root node is key, it suggests to me to make this scene file called key.tscm. That's great. I'll press save. And now I need to add some script, some coding. So I'm going to select the root node of the scene. I'm going to press the add script button. It'll suggest again the name key.gd for a GD script code file. And so I'll press create. I don't have to change anything up here. And what I want to do now is use this Area 2D's default signal, which is body entered, to detect if a physics body, like my character, is entering the area of this area. So if I go and select my root node and go up to the node dock and double click on body entered here, I can connect a method to this signal so that the method or function runs when that signal is triggered. So I'll just press connect here. I didn't change anything up here. I didn't retype anything here. I'll press connect. Now what's happening is when this key detects a body entering it, it's going to run a function or a method called, well, it's right here in our code because we just added it. It's called onKeyBodyEntered. What do we want to have happen when our character enters the key zone? Well, let's back up a little bit here. If I select the root node of my key and then go over to the inspector, I need to set up my collision layers and collision masks. If you're not sure what I'm talking about here, I'll go ahead and put a link up to that video where I set up my first collision layers and masks. And when I talked about that, what I'm getting at here is we want to make sure our key is on a specific collision layer. More specifically, though, that the key can only detect when the character or your player is entering it and not like when enemies go and collect the key. You don't want that to happen. So I have my, under this collision section here, everything by default on layer 1, or this key is on layer 1, and it has a mask of 1. That mask is actually right, because if I click on this ellipses button, my layer 1 is the player layer. And this mask means that this key can only detect things that are on that first player layer. The mask is what this object can detect in your scene. This key, though, doesn't actually need to be on any layer itself because nothing else needs to actually detect the key itself. Only the key needs to detect other things in the scene. Nothing needs to know about the key. The key needs to know about, well, just the player. So turn off all layers and leave mask 1 on if you're doing this like me. And so now nothing else can collect the key, and the key only knows about the player. Okay. Why am I doing that? Because I'm going to, when the key has the player, and we know it's the player now entering that area, we want to make the key invisible. So I'm going to select the root node. I'm going to show you now that under the visibility section of that key, there is this property called visible, on and off. This is a Boolean property, and of course we can edit any property of your object with code. So I'm going to change this to off by simply saying right here, instead of pass, visible equals false. And because this is an on-off checkbox, that means it's a Boolean false or true variable, and by default it's true, so now it's off. We also want to make sure that this mask gets turned off so your player can't run out and run back into the key and confuse it. We want to make sure that nothing else can touch the key after it's been entered the very first time. So I'm going to call a method right here called set collision mask bit. I'll type that in the beginning of it. I'll press down and enter to fill out the rest of that line of code. And I'm going to turn this mask bit off so nothing else can touch the key. So to turn this mask bit off with this method call, this mask bit 1 is actually bit 0. Mask layer 2 is actually bit 1. These are all different numbers by 1 less, so 1 is 0. What I'm getting at here is I need to type 0 to select that mask bit, and I need to type a comma and then say false. I'm going to turn this bit to off, but here with code. Okay. We also want to play a sound when you collect the key, and so I'm going to select the root node of this scene. I'm going to press plus. I'm going to add an audio stream player, not the 2D or the 3D one, just the default one with no other thing after it. So I'll double click. Audio stream players are how you play sounds in your game. I'm going to rename this to sound key, and I'll press enter. What sound are we going to play when we actually collect our key? Well, that file is going to be in my sounds assets folder. It is called confirmation2.ogg. Before I actually play that for you, I'm going to select that file down here. I need to go up to import and turn off loop, because all sound files loop continuously again and again, unless you turn that off and then press re-import. And you have to do that, unfortunately, for every single sound file that you bring into Godot. So I selected it, import, turned off loop, and then pressed re-import. Now that I've done that, if I double click on that sound file over here, it gives me a preview of it over here in the inspector. And down here, I can press play. And that's what it sounds like. It's way too loud, so when I actually use it in that audio stream player, we'll turn the volume down. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my scene doc and select that sound key node, and I'm going to drag confirmation 2 into my empty stream of that audio stream player, and I can look at the waveform of it here and notice that it's quite big at the beginning. That shows me that it's loud. So I'm going to turn the volume in decibels down to -15 or so. You can decide that value for yourself. I think that should work. How do you get your sound to actually play? Well, on my next line of code, I'm going to say $sign to select a different node in my node tree. It lists them for me here. I'm going to say $sound key dot play. That's going to tell our sound key node in our tree with the $sign to play its one sound. Let's go and see if this works. I'm going to press Control S to save. I'm going to go back to my level 1. I'm going to go and look at my actual scene. If you need to pause the video to get that, please do. Please pause the video, but I'll go back to my 2D scene, and I'm going to go into my scene tree over here. I'll select my root node, and I'm going to link in or make an instance of another scene, in this case, my key, and I'll press open. So now I have a key in my scene tree, and it is right here. I don't want the key to be in front of everything in my level. Right now, my key would show up in front of my character, which I don't want. So I'm going to drag the key up and in between 2 other nodes. So don't drag it on top of a different node, drag it between 2 other nodes, and I'm going to put it right below, which means in front of all the different tiles in my game level. So now it'll be behind my character, but in front of any tiles that make up my game level platforms and world and scene. So I have this key. I might want to move my character over a little bit and move the key right about here. If you want to place your key precisely, you can turn on grid snapping, and then you can configure your snap to be in whatever size of increment of pixels that you want. In my case, 8 and 8 is my grid, but I don't think that's ideal. Anyways, I'll place my key, and now I can save my level, Control S, and I'll play this scene. And so now I'm in my game, I can collect my key, and my key has vanished. The key is actually still there though, and I could leave it like this, although it is good practice to delete things from your game, and you should know by now, if you've been watching videos in this series, how you delete a node in your game. Why did I just make I'll go back to my script and to my key script. Why didn't I just use that function here called QFree? That's how you get rid of, well, in this case, the key in your game. This is how you could actually delete the key from your game level. Well, if I did that, then my sound couldn't play. When you delete a whole node and all of its children, including a sound key, the sound key stops playing. So I don't want to delete the key right away. Instead, I'm going to wait until this sound has finished playing. So I'm going to select that sound key, which is an audio stream player. And audio stream players have a signal built in called finished. And this finished signal will get fired or will run any method that you link to it when that sound finishes playing. So I'm going to go ahead and select that audio stream player. I'll go to my node dock, I'll go to finished, I'll double click on finished to make a new receiving method or function called onSoundKey finished. I'll connect it. So here it is, it made this method or function for me. And now I'm going to say when the sound is finished, then run QFree. And QFree is the method that will delete an object from your game level. Okay, so if I press Control S to save and I go back to level 1, if you need to pause the video, please do. But I'll go back to level 1 and press play scene. And so now if I collect my key, it's actually gone from my game level. Next up, I need to add an indicator to my heads up display up here to show that I either don't have the key yet or that I have found the key. And just having an empty key up here in your heads up display will indicate to the game player, the person playing, that there is a key to find. And then when they do find it, you want it to change to a filled in solid key. And actually, when you have this heads-up display in your level, this can be where you keep track of where or when you have a key and when you don't have a key. So this heads-up display that we're going to do right now, this addition to it, is going to serve two purposes, both a visual indicator of if you have the key and to keep track if you have it using code or if you don't have it or do have it. So let's go ahead and jump in to our scene tree where I have my heads up display set up right here. In my 2D scene, it is right here. By the way, if you have not seen the video on when I made this heads up display, in a later video, I added the hearts to it. But if you need to see the original video on the heads up display, I'll put a link to that up on the screen right now. What I'm going to do here is select the root node of this HUD, and I'm going to add another texture rectangle, which is what I'm making up most of the pictures in this heads-up display with. So I'll select the root node. I'm going to press plus. I'm going to add a new texture rectangle, texture rect for short. I'll double click, and I'll name that new texture rectangle, which is a child of the HUD. I'll rename it to just key with a capital K. Okay, this key texture rectangle needs, under the inspector, a texture, which is going to be in my file system doc. It is going to be in my HUD folder, which is right here. It's the key yellow empty PNG picture. So with my key empty texture rectangle selected, I'll drag the empty HUD key up into its texture. So there it is. I'll turn on this expand option, which lets me scale it. If you don't have this turned on, you can't actually scale the picture. So I'll press Control Z and then turn expand on. It shrinks to, I think, its default size, but now I can scale it. And if I hold Shift, I can make it scale uniformly. But what I think I'll do here is I'll drag it over into where it's going to be. I'll hold Shift, I think, and make it a little bit bigger. And I'll use my rotate tool and I'll rotate it a little bit more side to side. Maybe I'll make it a little bit diagonal there. So I think that's fine. And I'll use my arrow tool and I'll move it up to where it's going to be next to my coin counter number here. And then I will take my hearts, both the full hearts and the empty hearts. So I'll hold Shift and select both of them there, and I'll drag them over and I'll hold Shift to make sure they go straight over to right about there. And then I'll use my down arrow key. I think they were a little bit high up There we go. And I'll make this background, which is a panel. I'll make it a little bit wider to fit everything in my HUD now. So I have an empty key in my HUD, and it's just a texture rectangle. I'm going to update the code of my HUD to reflect what I need to do here. On the HUD, I have a script file, so I'll click on that little icon to go into its code. And in my HUD's code, I'm going to add 2 new variables. I'm going to just make a quick way of accessing this node. I'll make a variable that acts as a pointer to my key so I can change it really easily with code on other objects. So what I'll do here is I'm going to make a variable called key, and I'm going to make it equal to this actual node. So this variable is going to act like a pointer. If I say a variable equals $, and then a node like key, which is my texture rectangle, I can just say, hey, key in code, and it'll refer to the actual node. Makes it easier to type, especially from other objects, and we'll see that in just a moment. However, this will not actually work because when you load a actual node in your scene tree as a reference or being referenced from a variable in code, if that code loads first before the actual node is loaded, in this case, it probably loads things from top to bottom. So if your code doesn't know where this is because it actually hasn't loaded yet, you need to put a keyword here called onReady. And that onReady keyword goes before the keyword var. So now that line of code should work. It waits until the key is actually loaded before it actually assigns it finally to your variable. We also want your heads-up display to keep track of if you have found the key or not. So I'm going to make a new variable down here up at the top of my code called var has key. And I'm going to make it equal to false at the beginning. So when your game first loads, this variable will know that you don't have the key. False is you don't have the key, true is you do have the key. What is this operator? If you have not seen that operator before with a colon and an equals, essentially what this does is it works almost the same as having an equal sign, except when you first assign a variable to have a value, like a first initialization of a value in a variable, this operator makes sure that this variable from this point on can only hold this type of data. Usually when you make a variable just with equal signs, which is called the assignment operator, you can then later on assign it a different type of data. Like I could assign has key later to, false in quotes, which is a string, or I could assign it to the value 7, which is an integer, a number. You don't want your program to be able to do that. And so when you use this operator, it essentially means that you are restricted later on from changing it to something that's not, in this case, a Boolean variable data type. Okay, so we have 2 variables here. Hopefully that made sense. We're on our HUD node. This is our HUD node's code. I'll press Control S to save. But how do we actually get it so that when we collect our key in our game level right here, the key, how do we get so that the key actually tells the heads-up display to change not only the texture of this texture rectangle to be the solid key, but also to change that Boolean variable from false to true, the has key Boolean variable? Well, we could use a signal here. We could make a signal. In fact, we already have one on the key. I'll go back to my key right here and my keys code. I could select this node, the key node, and I could use its body entered signal, which we already have a function which is being called. And I could say, hey, also call a function on the HUD, and the HUD could then change its variables and its texture. I don't want to do that because that's not very reusable. If I want to make other levels in my game, which also have different keys and different HUDs, I don't want to always link things that I'm going to reuse up with signals. How will I do this then? Well, on my key, I'm going to make a new variable. So in my key code, I'm going to make an exported variable. So I'm going to say export var, and I'm going to call it HUD. This is going to be a reference to the HUD that's in this game level, level 1. So my key now, if I select it, has in the inspector, it doesn't yet actually. I'm going to go back to my keys code. If I assign this variable a value, let's say I give it the value 7 and I save this file. And then I go back to my 2D workspace and I select the key, I now have exported a variable right here called HUD to the inspector. This is the number 7 that I just coded, and this is the name that I just gave that variable. By the way, when you give a variable a name and then it shows up exported to this inspector, it always gets a capital letter at the beginning, even if it didn't in your code. Okay, so if I change this variable, I can do it right here, and I can have different keys, and I can change different variables or this variable to different values on my different keys. That's what exported variables let you do. They let you change the value right here in the inspector for every copy or instance you have in your scene. Why do I want to have this? Because I want to make an exported variable that's going to act as a pointer to the HUD in this level. I want to be able to go into my editor here and select my key and then give this key a reference right here to this level's heads up display. So basically, I want to give this HUD variable a reference to, well, this node right here. Essentially, I want to take my key HUD variable and drag in this HUD right there, but we can't do that until on my keys code, I make this exported variable have a type, and you can specify a type of data by putting round brackets after the word export. We want to make this export be a node path, and node has a capital N and path has a capital P with no space. When you make a variable that's exported into a node path, you can then make it store not a number. I'll get rid of this =7. But when you do this and go back and you save this code and you go back into your 2D workspace, you can then select that object, the key, and you can assign its variable to point to one of the other nodes in this scene, like in this case, this node right here. So with the key selected, I can then click on the HUD's assign button. And this is available because it knows that it's a node path because we just changed that in our code. And I'm going to select the HUD root node right there and press OK. So now my key knows where it has a pointer, a node path to the heads up display. But there's a problem. If I go back into my script, this variable is actually not really a pointer, by strict definition, a pointer to the HUD in my scene. It is a node path, and a node path is kind of like a website URL. When you start typing a website address into an address bar in a web browser, if you did it properly and fully, you would actually type http://www.youtube.com. And this is not the website YouTube itself. This is just a path, a URL of how to get to youtube.com. Likewise, this node path basically says, how do you get to the HUD, but it actually isn't a pointer to the HUD itself. How do we fix this? Well, I'm going to make my HUD variable equal to itself, HUD, but I'm going to make it equal to itself converted to a pointer. And how do you do that? Well, you put this value right here into get nodes, which is a method, round brackets as a parameter. So this is sort of a little complicated one line of code here. We're making a new variable called HUD, which must be a node path when you assign it a value in your inspector. So it's exported, but it must be a node path. However, once you've gotten that node path, you're saying make the variable itself equal to its node path, but converted to an actual pointer, which will then let you just say HUD in your code later on to point to your HUD in your scene. Hopefully that makes sense. So in my 2D scene, I'll go ahead and press Control S to save that. And if you need to get that, please do, except we're missing one keyword and we're getting an error right now. This red line tells me something is wrong. When you export and you get a pointer to a node in your scene, you must make your variable have that onReady keyword before the word var. Because you are pointing to another node in your scene, you need to wait until it's actually loaded before you try to access it and save it as a pointer in a variable. So there's that line of code. You can go ahead and pause the video and get it for yourself if you're following along. So if I save this code, Control S to save, and I go back to my 2D workspace and I go and select my key, it now has a pointer to the HUD. If I don't have that there, I'll reset it. I can click on Assign. I can select the heads up display, or I could even just drag the heads up display root node into it right there, and that would work just as well. Okay, so now my key knows about the HUD. What do I want to do with that? Well, in my key's code, when the key's body is entered by your character, I want to make it invisible. I want to turn off its collision layer mask. I want to play the sound, but then I want to go into my HUD, which I can just type HUD for because that's my pointer. And I can say dot, and now I'm going to get the HUD's key. So the HUD, I gave in the HUD code a variable called key, which is a quick access to its key node, which is the texture rectangle. So in my keys code, I can just say HUD dot key dot texture, and I can make it equal to a file that I've loaded down here from my file system doc in my project folder. So I can call a load method here with round brackets, and then in quotes, I can type the path of a file. In this case, HUD yellow or HUD key yellow .png. The path to that picture is right up here. It's this whole thing. So I can double click or triple click in there and copy that whole string and paste it. It's a path string and paste it right there. So if I go and look at that code, I'm making the texture of the key in the HUD equal to that picture. Great. I also want to turn on my HUD's has key variable. HUD.has key. I'm going to make it equal to true to make sure that the HUD knows that I actually have the key. So if I press Control S to save, if you need to pause the video, please do, but I should be good for my keys code and the HUD. If I go back to my 2D workspace and unmaximize my workspace there, if I go ahead and press Control S to save and play my scene, I should have that empty key sitting right there. And if I collect my key, it plays a sound and it updates this texture with the picture that I gave it. So there you go. Whew. Next, the door. We're going to make a new empty scene for the door, and the door is going to be another area 2D. So with this new scene, I'll press plus and make the root node an area 2D. Right there, I'll use that recently used node. I'll name this root node door with a capital D, and the door needs, well, I'll select the root node, I'll press plus. In this case, we're actually going to use an animated sprite because our door is going to have built-in states, the locked state, the closed state, and the open state, which are all going to have pictures that we just want to have preloaded in our game for us. So I'll use an animated sprite for this. I'll add it to my scene. I'm also going to select the root node and add a collision shape, which I'll just search for. That should be quicker. Collision shape 2D, just like before. And my animated sprite needs to have a new sprite frames resource here. This can't just be one picture that you drag over here. You need to click on the little arrow and say new sprite frames resource, which is what this is. And if you click on this, which, by the way, this is how we made our character be able to look like they're walking left and right and in the air, or any of the other visual states that we added to our character, which I think were walking, standing there idle, jumping in the air, and I think climbing up and down the ladder. Those were the visual states of our character. This is how we did that. We made an animated sprite. We made it have a new sprite frames resource. We are now down here because I clicked on the word sprite frames. We're down here in this panel that opened up. It's a doc. It's called the Sprite Frames Editor. I can give this animated sprite a few different animations. In this case, I'm going to rename the default animation to locked. I'm going to make a new animation called closed. I'll add one more. It's going to be, I'll rename it to open. I'm naming these all with all lowercase letters, by the way, so no capitals, no spaces, no funny characters. That'll make it easier for me later on. So my closed animation needs to have right over here the picture of the closed door. So I'll go find that in my assets folder down here under object, in that folder, in my assets folder, door closed for my closed animation. Locked, I'll drag in my locked door, and open, I'll drag in the open door. So I have one picture for each and they match up. My collision shape for my door has no shape assigned to it. So I'll select my collision shape. Under the shape property, I'll make a new rectangle shape, and I can zoom in on the door. This rectangle shape, I'm not going to make it the full size of the door. Instead, I'm going to make it a narrow strip in the middle of the door because I want my character to be quite centered over the door in order for it to consider you actually over the door. So I'm just going to make this a little bit taller. In fact, I'll hold Alt and make it taller here. We're going to edit this though, because I want the door to properly fit the character, and it won't unless I actually have the character here as a reference. So I'm going to do something funny right now. I'm going to select the root node of my door, and I'm going to add an instance of my character in the door scene just temporarily so I can resize this texture or this animated sprite to fit it properly. So I'm going to select the root node of my door. I'm going to press the link button. I'm going to bring in my character, which is called Steve. I'll press open. And so Steve is right here. If I drag him over while holding Shift on my keyboard, I can make sure that he only goes left and right once I start dragging him left and right. And then I can see how big the door is next to him. I don't want that to be the case. So I'm going to drag a corner here while holding Alt and Shift. Now I want him to line up when he's over the door with the plus or the cross that indicates where this whole object is. My object, my door, my area 2D, its origin is right here at 0, 0. When my character zaps or is teleported over to this door, I want him to be zapped right there. That's what's going to happen. So when that happens, I don't want the door's bottom to be lower down. I don't want him to fall down to the ground. I want the ground to be right where it should be at his feet. So that's why I put him back at 0, 0 in my scene. In fact, I'll go to transform and change his position to 0, 0 with Steve selected. I'm now going to drag him over and to the right, but I'll hold Shift while I do that to make sure that he never goes above 0 on the Y-axis here. When I do that, now I can scale this sprite, and this thing keeps popping up at the bottom. So I'll just close it, and I'm going to turn on my grid snapping because I want that sprite to line up perfectly. I can just drag the bottom with his feet, but when I do that, it stretches the sprite or squashes it. So I could grab the top and make it about right. What I might want to do here with my animated sprite selected is, now that I know that the height is about right, I think I might want to select the animated sprite, go to transform, and try to match these two numbers up for my scale. So I've got 0.72 for the height. I'm almost correct right there, but I'll type 0.72 in manually and press enter. So I kind of like the size of that. So you need to make sure that the sprite matches up with the feet and it's about the right size. Although you're just able to move the sprite around to do that, you're not moving the entire shape or the entire area around when you do that. Okay, so that looks pretty good for this size and location of the door compared to his feet. But now this area, this collision shape is wrong, so I'll drag it up. I don't need to go right to the ground. That doesn't really matter, but I'll put it right about there. So when Steve touches this area, he's going to be over the door. Okay. I don't need Steve anymore in this scene, so I can delete him. I'll right click on him and say delete nodes. What I do need though is I need to add a bigger checker, because in my game, when you go near to the door, so kind of off to the left or right, the door will know that you have the key or you don't have the key. And if you do have the key and you're near the door, I want the door to automatically unlock for you, so you can see it actually changing on your screen. If you waited until your character was actually over the door before it unlocked, you wouldn't notice as easily that the door picture is changing and the lock is being removed. So I'm going to select my root node of my door. I'm going to press plus. I'm going to add another area 2D into this scene. I'm going to name that near door. And I'm going to give this near door area 2D, I'll press plus. I'm going to give it a collision shape 2D right there. And I'm going to make this collision shape have a shape of a rectangle. And I'm going to make it a little bit taller. And I'm going to make it definitely a lot wider. So it'll know if the character is near the door. That's why, that's what it's called, near door. Now that I've done that, I can save this scene, Control S, I'll call it door.tscm. and I'll press save. And my door, of course, needs some code. So I'll select the root node of the door. I'll press add script, and door.gd is just fine. I'll press create. In the code of the door, I'm going to keep track of a few things. I need to make a variable to keep track if you're over the door or if you're not over the door. I want to know if your player is standing right here or standing not anywhere near the door at all. So in my doors script, I'm going to make a variable called isOverDoor, like that, capital O, capital D, and I'm going to make it equal to a Boolean value of false. We're going to assume that you're not over the door when you start the game. The door is also going to need to know if you have the key or not, and that comes from your heads-up display. So when you're playing your game, and I'll go back to my level 1, you have your heads-up display that has that variable called has key in it. Well, the door in your game, in fact, all the doors in your game that you're going to actually go up to and see if you can unlock them, they need to know if you have that key yet or not. So it makes sense in my doors code, which is right here, to have another one of those exported HUD pointers that lets the door know about the HUD, the heads-up display in this game level. The door actually isn't in the game level yet, but it will be. So I'm going to go back to my keys code, and I'm going to select that same exact line and copy it, and I'll paste it into my doors code up at the top. I'll put it before anything else so that when you load the door into the game, you can give every door a pointer to the heads-up display individually, and then it can know and find the HUD's has key variable. What else are we going to do? Well, I'm going to use my doors signal. So I'll select the root node of the door. I'll go over to the node signals doc. We're going to use these two signals called body entered and body exited, which can detect if something enters the area or exits the area to know if your character is over the door. So I'm going to select my root node of my door. I'll go over to my signals under the node doc. I'll double click on body entered and press connect. So it makes a new signal here that'll be triggered and call this function when your character enters the door area. Likewise, I'm going to use the body exited signal as well. So I'll double click on that and press connect. So now if a character enters the door, it'll fire this signal and run this function. Same thing with leaving the door. My door, though, can access more things right now than just my character. So with my door root node selected, I'm going to go back to the inspector where I need to make sure the collision layers are set up properly. The door doesn't need to be discoverable by anything else in the game, but the door does need to be able to discover or detect players. So with the root node selected, I'll turn off its layer. It can just find players on the player layer 1. So just layer 1 in the mask. And same thing with near door. It can just be on no layer at all, but know about players in layer 1. Okay, so for both door and near door, it's the same, just mask 1. In my code of the door, I'm going to say when the player enters the door area, I'm going to say isOverDoor is going to be equal to true. Likewise, if you exit the door, isOverDoor is going to equal to false. Likewise, our near door is also going to have to detect if you're near the door, if the player is coming up and next to the door. And the reason we're doing that is because we want to know when your player is over here or over here, if they have the key yet or not. So I'm going to use the near door area 2D's signal as well, but just the body entered signal. We don't need to know if you exit this area. So we'll double click on body entered here and press connect because we want this new function here when we're on the near door body entered to go and look at the HUD and see if you have the key or not. And if you have the key, we're going to make sure this door knows that it should be unlocked. So I'm going to say right here, HUD dot, because we have a reference to our HUD. And I'm going to say if the HUD's has key variable is true, and we could put equal true here, but we don't need to do that. We can just say if HUD.hasKey. In fact, I need to put the word if right there. If the HUD knows that you have the key, I can put a colon right there. and press enter. Well, if that's true, then you can unlock the door. To do that, I'm simply going to have 2 lines of code here. First, I'm going to reference our animated sprite, and I'm going to say, so $, and then animated sprite, and I'll put a dot where I can then say, hey, animated sprite, I want you to play your animation called closed, whereas the default was locked. So when you enter that area, the near door checker, and you have the key, well, it'll unlock and you'll actually see that on the screen. While I'm here though, it would be good for us to actually know if the door is locked or not and have a variable to keep track of that. So up at the top of my code, I'm going to say var is locked, and I'm going to make it equal to true at the beginning of the game. So the door will know that it's locked at the beginning, but if you go near the door and you have the key, you should open the door or make it no longer locked by showing its closed door with no lock symbol. And I'm going to say is locked is going to equal false. So I think we have enough here to test this out. If I press Control S to save, I've got my door code saved. I think my door is finished, at least for now. So if I go back to my level 1 and view my scene, what I'll do here is make an instance of my door, but because I'm going to have a few doors, at least 2 in my game level, I'm going to select the root node of my scene, and I'm going to press plus. I'm going to add just a node 2D into my game first. This node 2D is going to act like a folder, kind of like I have a folder, a node 2D here that keeps all of my enemies kind of in one nice collapsible branch of my scene tree. So that's what this is. I'll name this new little folder here doors, and I'm going to drag it up to be, I think, just behind or above in this stack in my scene dock here, just behind the key. Okay, so I'll select that node. I'm going to create an instance. I'll link in my door scene right here, door.tscn. I'll double click. I'm going to rename this door right away to door 1. So we can know that we'll have a door 2 once we duplicate it. And it is right here. I'll go ahead and drag it over. I'll turn on my snapping here, my grid snapping, and I'll snap it down to the floor right there. So I think that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and save our scene. I'll turn off my grid snapping. I'll press play scene. And oh, you know what? I got an error. It is letting me know that my door needs to have that HUD reference right away. So if I look at my scene here, my door has just been added, but if I select the door and go over to the HUD, it needs to know about the HUD and where it is in my scene. So I can press this assign button, or I can just drag in my HUD right there, and it should work. Of course, I could also press assign and select it from this list here right there and press OK as well. Let's go ahead and press Control S to save, and I'll press play scene. And this time it does not crash. I have my door. If I go up in front of it, I actually am in front of it and not behind it. If I press up, nothing happens yet. Of course, we'll add that. But if I go and find my key and then go back near the door, it's unlocked. So that near door checker worked. It changed from having a little lock on there to not. So we are making progress. Next, what we have to do is go back into our door. So I'll go back into my door scene. In fact, I'll jump back into my doors code. In our doors code, what I'm going to do is I'm going to check 60 times per second to see if you're over the door and if you have the key and if you're pressing the up arrow key on your keyboard. That means that your player would be standing right here. If they had the key and they were pressing up, the door should then look like it's opened. So that's the next goal here. So in my doors code right here, I'm going to add a function. It is the one that we've used in pretty much every single video in this series, physics process delta, or underscore physics process delta. This is our game loop. It's our 60 times per second checker. In this function, 60 times per second, we're going to check to see if we are over the door, and if we have the key, and if we're pressing the up arrow key on our keyboard. If all of those things are true, then we should be able to go through the door and the door should open. So if is over door, And if that's true, then that will work. We don't have to say equals equals true, although we could. We can just say is over door, because that's how Boolean variables work when you're evaluating them. So is over door, and if you have the key, so that is if HUD dot has key, and if we're pressing up on our keyboard. Earlier in this series, I added some new actions into my project settings. Under input map, I made actions called left, right, jump, run, fire, up and down. So I'm going to check to see if the player is pressing the up arrow key on their keyboard by checking for this action. If you don't have these set up in your project, you could use UI up, which is the default, but I'm using my own. So I'm going to say and input with a capital I dot is action, and I'm going to use just pressed. I'm going to use the just version here because we want to just press it once and not detect it again and again and again by holding down the up arrow key. And I'm going to say up like that. So if all those things are true, I'll put a colon. Then what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to go to this door's sprite and make it play its animation called open. So I'm going to say $ animated sprite dot play, and I'll select the open animation there as a string. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this. Control S to save. If you need to pause the video to get that code, please do. But if I go back to level 1, I'll save it while I'm there. I'll press play scene. Well, now if I'm over the door and I don't have the key, nothing should happen when I press up. However, if I go and get the key, it collects. And now if I go near the door, it should unlock, and I press up. Hey, it opened, it worked. If it did not open, that means you didn't have the key. And so we should actually start thinking about adding sounds into our door scene. So in my door scene, I'm going to select the root node. I want my door to make a sound when it unlocks. I also want it to make a sound when you go to it. And if it doesn't unlock, I want to play a little rejection sound, like a little nope, that doesn't work. The door is not going to open for you sound. So I'm going to select my root node of the scene. I'm going to press plus. I'm going to add another audio stream player right there. I'm going to call this sound, type correctly, sound unlock. And for sound unlock, I'm going to use the sound in my sounds folder right here called question 003. Of course, before I go and play that for you, I'm going to select it down here. I'm going to go up to import, turn off looping, and then press re-import, so it doesn't just keep playing again and again when I preview it. So I've re-imported it with no looping. I can now double click on it. It'll show up over here in the inspector, and I can press play. That's the sound that will play when you unlock the door. Is that what I was talking about? Yes, that's what I was talking about. So that sound, I'm going to select my audio stream player, and I'm going to drag that OGG sound file into the stream of sound unlock. It is quite a loud sound, so I'm going to turn down the volume in decibels to -15. So it won't play so overwhelmingly loud. And in my doors code, I'll go back and maximize this workspace and close my dock at the bottom of the screen. When I enter the near door bigger checker and I have the key in the HUD, I'm going to unlock the door by playing the closed door animation. I'm going to make sure the door knows that it's no longer locked, and I'm going to select that node called sound unlock right here and tell it to play. Okay. While I'm at it though, let's go ahead and add another audio stream player, but I'm going to actually just right click on this one and say duplicate, and I'll name this one sound locked. Right like that. And when you go up to the door and you try to unlock it, but you don't have the key, I want to play the sound pep sound 1. So that is right here. Of course, I'm going to go up to import with it selected, turn off looping, and re-import it before I then double click on it to play it for you down here. That's the little rejection sound. When you don't have the key and you try to unlock the door, it's locked. Okay, so I'm going to select that sound locked audio stream player. I'll drag in pep sound 1. You can see by its little audio waveform that it's not very loud at all. So I'll just turn down its volume to -2 decibels. By the way, 0 decibels is the default normal sound volume for a sound file. So -2 is just a little bit quieter. Okay. Now that I've done that, let's go back into our doors code. And where are we going to actually call sound locked? Well, if you're checking 60 times per second that you have the key, and if you're pressing up, well, you can open the door, but I'm going to put another check. I'm going to say elif. That means else if. Else if, or elif, you are over the door, so is over door, and I'll just be lazy here and copy this. So you're over the door and you are pressing the up key on your keyboard, but you don't have the key. I'm going to play the sound called sound locked dot play bracket bracket. Okay, I might press enter a few times to get some extra space below that in my code. So if you need to get that code for yourself, go ahead and pause the video now, but I'll press Control S on my keyboard to save that. I'll go back to my level 1 and I'll press play scene. So now if I'm in my game and I don't have the key, it does not unlock. And if I press up, it's not going to let me unlock it. But if I go and get the key and then go back to the door, hey, it's unlocked. It played that little sound and I can open the door. Great. What's next? Well, in my game level, I need a second door. So I'm going to go over to my scene tree where I have door 1, and I'm simply going to right click on the door, and I'm going to say duplicate. And if, like me, you named your first door door 1 and you duplicate it, it'll automatically renumber it to door 2 in Godot. That's nice. So now I have 2 doors in the same spot. Obviously, I don't want that. You can put your door anywhere else, but I suggest you put it near to the first door. I'll put mine right over here. I'll turn on grid snapping just so you can access the doors quite easily within a reasonable amount of time while you're checking things when you're making your game. And then you can move your door over later on. So I have 2 doors, but how do they know about each other? How do they know when you go to door 1 that it's supposed to teleport you over to door 2? Well, we're going to make a pointer on each one to the door that it should go to, its target. So I'm going to go back to the doors code. And by the way, when you edit one door, it edits all the doors because this is simply a reference, an instance of the same original door scene. So when I edit the door code 1, it edits the door code 2 file as well. They are identical. On each door, I'm going to make another one of these exported NodePath references to a different node. In this case, I'm going to copy my HUD reference exported variable, and I'm going to paste it, except I'm going to name this variable target. And I have to make sure that I'm getting the node of that target and not the HUD. So both target, not HUD and HUD. So now every door, if I save that scene, I've now updated both doors. So if I go back, if you need to pause the video to get that, please do. But if I go back to my 2D scene and I select door 1, it has a spot to assign a reference to another node. So I'll click on assign. This is door 1, so I'm going to select door 2, and I'll press OK. Likewise, I'll select door 2, and it needs an assignment to its target. I'm going to assign it door 1. So now they each know where you should go to if you go over that door and it's unlocked and you press up. Great. So now in each door code, I'll go back to my doors script right there, and I'll maximize this workspace so you can see what's going on. If I am checking 60 times per second to check to see if I am over the door and if I have the key and if I'm pressing up, it should open the door, but it should also teleport you over to your target door. We can simply do that by saying, hey, take our player and make your player jump to the exact coordinates, the position of your target door. However, in this door code, we don't have a pointer to our character. Now, I could on the door make another export variable called player and get a reference to the door. However, this code actually already has a reference to your character called body, which is easier than just making a whole new exported variable. When your player enters the door's area's collision shape, well, you get a reference to what physics body did that. In this case, it's always going to be your character and not some other object like an enemy, because you have your collision layers and masks set up properly, right? So what I'm going to do here is make a new variable called player. And I'm not going to assign it any value at the beginning. But as soon as you go onto the door, that means your character is in this little zone or this little zone right here. Well, I'm going to make that body that entered that door equal to the player. In other words, right here, I'm simply going to say, hey, make my player variable equal to that body that entered that little zone, which can only be your character. Okay, so now this player is the same kind of a pointer to your character that you already have, but where you made exported variables before. So now if I go back over to my physics process delta and I say, hey, when you're over the door and you have the key and you press up, play the open animation on your door, I can also say, make the player's position. And by the way, if I go back to my 2D scene and I select Steve, my character has properties, of course. My character has under its transform properties a position, which is an X and Y vector 2 value. What I can essentially just say here is take this whole position and make it equal to the position of my target door. It's quite as simple as that. So if I go back to my doors script and I maximize my workspace, if I say make my player's position equal to target dot position, it is as easy as that, at least at the beginning. So if I go ahead and save that and I go back to my 2D scene and I press play scene, well, now if I go and get my key and then I go up to my door, it unlocks, and if I press up, I've jumped over to the other door. And because the code is identical on both doors, I can go up to this door and jump back to the other door, and back and forth and back and forth. But I want to make this a little bit more polished. I want to make sure that when you go in front of a door and you press up, well, there should be a little bit of timing involved in here. When I press up, I want to have the door look like it is open. And then after a very slight pause, I want your character to then disappear. So they're going through that black opening of the open door. And then after a tiny little pause after that, then I want your character to jump over to the door, but your character will actually turn invisible in that time because I want your character to disappear at the door. And then when you're looking at the next door, I want it to then open in front of your eyes. So it should start closed and then appear open. And then I want your character, after another slight pause, to then appear. So there's going to be some timing involved here. If you see where I'm going with this, it's going to look a lot better than it currently does. Right now, the doors don't even open when you go back and forth. So let's fix that. What I'm going to do here is go into my door scene and select the root node. I'm going to add, I'll press this plus button, a node called a timer. And you've seen this before in this series. A timer is a node that does what it sounds like. It can be told to start, it can be told to stop, it can be told to time for a certain amount of time, like a second. In this case, we're going to use less than a second increments. And a timer by default loops again and again. So it fires, it triggers, it alarms every second by default, but you can make it a one-shot, a timer that does not keep repeating. In this case, we actually are going to have it repeat to make all those little steps have a little delay between them when we open the door, when we make our character vanish, all that. This timer though, I'm going to make it have a wait time of 0.3 seconds. That's not very much time, but it's just enough to have a little delay between all those little parts. In my doors code, so if you need to pause the video to get that last little step and add the timer, please do and set it to 0.3, but looping, so don't turn one shot on. If you've done that, let's go into our code and I'll maximize my workspace here. Actually, I'm going to name that timer. I'm going to call it timer teleport, just like that. Because when I am checking 60 times per second, and if I'm over the door and I have the key and I press up, I want to open the door right away, that very moment. I don't want to change my position right away, so I'm going to get rid of that line. Don't worry, we'll use it again in just a few moments. But now I want to start that timer. because I want to wait just a third of a second, basically 0.3 seconds, before I do any of the next steps. So I'm going to tell that timer to now start. So I'm going to say $timer teleport dot start. And from that point on, it's going to continuously, again and again and again, fire and emit a signal if I want it to every time that 0.3 runs out, again and again and again. What do I want to have happen when each of those little increments or timers runs out? Well, if I select my timer and then go to my node signals, there is a timeout signal built into timers. And I'll double click on timeout, and I'm going to add a function. I'm going to rename it actually down here. It's going to be called teleport. And just so you know, you can rename these methods. It's up to you. And I'll press connect. And so now I have this new function at the bottom of my code called teleport. What do I want to have happen here? Well, I need to keep track of which step in the teleportation process I'm in. So I'm actually going to go back up to the top of my code, and I'm going to make a new variable called var teleport state. And I'm going to make it equal to 0. This number is going to be used to keep track of which step in the process of teleportation, whether it be open a door, close a door, hide your character, make your character jump across, make your camera jump across with you. We're going to keep track of it in about 4 or 5 different steps. Okay, that's why we have this. Down in that, and make sure you get that variable, but I'll scroll down now. In that function called teleport, which will again get called every time that we have one of those 0.3 second increments, I'm going to make a match statement. So I'm going to say match. Now, what is this? A match statement is basically a more concise, easier way of writing a bunch of ifs. I could say here, if teleport state is equal to 0, then do this. Else if, or elif teleport state is equal to 1, and then if it's equal to 2, and then if it's equal to 3. And after each time this function runs, I can increment or add 1 to this teleport state. I could make it count 1 or 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, and I could run a different if statement in this function for every different state that I want my teleportation to happen. I don't want to write a bunch of if and else statements. I can do that more concisely by using a match statement. If you watch the video in this series on how to create a finite state machine where my character was able to run or not run, where we organized our character's code. In fact, I'm going to go back to my level 1 and show you, just to remind you that my character's code has a bunch in that physics process delta. It has a bunch of states. We have name states here using an enum called air, floor, ladder, and wall. And in the physics process delta, instead of saying, hey, if my character is on the wall or on the floor or in the air, I'm simply using a match state. This variable here is my state enum, which could be just an integer in our case in this video, and we have it matching states.air or states.floor, and all the different parts of our character's behavior are mapped to these different sections of my code. Likewise, in my door, we're not going to be as fancy. We're not going to make an enum. We're just going to say 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, but I'm saying match teleport state. I'll put a colon, and then instead of saying if and then putting more variables and more symbols and operators, I can just say basically if teleport state is equal to 0, or if it's equal to 1. And I can line these up and have a bunch of them top to bottom with different instructions under each one. Hopefully that makes sense. My first state is actually going to be 0, and this state is going to run after the first 0.3 seconds. Remember that when you start your timer, it's already made your door look like it's open, but after 0.3 seconds later, what do we want to have happen? Well, I'm going to indent that one more tab under your 0 colon. What am I going to do here? Well, I'm just going to write comments for now. After 0.3 seconds, I want to make the player invisible. That should happen. I should also make the teleport sound play. So play sound of teleportation. Those are the two things I want to have happen after 0.3 seconds. So just for now, I'm going to put the word pass right there, and that'll stop our code from erroring later on. After the second 0.3 seconds, so I'll back up only 2 tabs in here. I'll type a 1 and a colon, and I'll press enter, and it'll auto indent it one more time to keep things proper here. After 0.6 seconds in the second step here, I'm going to actually move the player over to the target door. And I'm going to put a second line here. I'm also going to move the camera to follow. And I'll put a question mark there because I'll make that optional and I'll explain why later in this video. So I'll put a pass right here just so my code doesn't have an error in it. If I didn't have a pass here and I didn't have any actual code, I would get red lines and it wouldn't like that very much. And I'll get rid of these once I actually type in this code to fill these spots in. So I'm going to press enter and backspace to make my state 2, which is the third step. After my player is invisible and after they've jumped over to the other door and the camera has followed them, what's next? Well, I'll press enter here. I want the target door. I'll make a comment here. Target door set to open. I want to actually show them that the door that they're going to is opened up. That's going to be at first step 3 or when state is equal to 2. So I'll put pass there. I'll back up, make state 3. The only thing that'll happen next is I'm going to make the player visible again. Okay. In state 4, right here. And I need to add a pass under that one right there so it doesn't complain at me anymore. In state 4, I need to make sure I close both doors so they look like they're closed again. So I'll put a close origin door and close target door. And I want to actually stop my timer at this point. I'm not going to type this in a comment. I'm actually going to type this actual code here. So I'll put a $sign. I will say timer teleport dot stop. Bracket. There we go. So now we almost have a system where we have all these little delays. We are calling teleport again and again and again. However, right now, this variable teleport state is only set to 0 and it doesn't increment. It doesn't add 1 after every time it does the previous step. So down here under 4, but actually not indented like it is right now, I'm going to backspace so I'm lined up with my match statement here so it happens after every single increment every time. I'm going to say teleport state is going to have 1 added to it. How do I add 1 to teleport state? Well, I can use this funny increment operator. It's called plus equals. If you put a variable that has a number, an integer in it, and then you put plus equals, the number that you put after it, in this case 1, will be added to that variable. You might also write teleport state equals teleport state plus 1. That would also make teleport state equal to what it just was, plus 1, but a nicer way of writing that is plus equals 1. Some of you who are programmers might also think plus plus would work, although I don't know that plus plus works. I don't think it does work in GDScript. Plus plus is an increment operator that adds 1 automatically, but this is the code that you want, okay? And it needs to be indented the same as your match statement and not indented like that, okay? So this is how it should be. Let's go ahead now that we have that, and hopefully you can see what's happening here. I'm going to fill in these comments with actual code. How do we make the player invisible? Well, I'm going to say player.visible is going to be equal to false. That should do it. We'll wait a moment before adding this teleport sound. Let's continue on with code that we can add quickly. How do I make my player jump over to the target door? Well, we did that before. It's player.position equals target.position. And that's going to happen while the player is invisible. Done. How do we move the camera over to follow the player? Well, I'm going to leave that as a comment for now, and you'll see what happens. I'm going to take the target door and make it play the open animation that it has. Let's just go ahead and make sure in our doors code, which is what we're on right now, that we have a variable that points to the door's sprite. Do we have that? No, we don't. If you think about it, if you're telling the other door to access its animated sprite and change the animation that it's playing, it would be easier to do that from the first door if we had a simple variable that was a pointer to this animated sprite, but right in the code. So I'm going to say var, and I'm just going to call this simply sprite. I'm going to make it equal to $, the animated sprite in this scene. And that's going to be the door that we can change to play, to launch, to close, to open. This needs to be an onReady variable though, because we are making a pointer to something that needs to actually wait and then load into memory. So now I can simply say, if you need to pause the video to get that, please do. But I'm going to scroll down in my code and I'm simply going to say, when I want to make the target door open, I can simply say target.sprite.play, and I'm going to play the animation called open. Great. I need to then make in state 3 the player visible. So I'm going to say player.visible equals true, and that'll happen after, again, one more 0.3 seconds later. Then I need to close both doors. So I'll be a little bit lazy here. I'll copy this line of code. I want to close the target door right there. So I'll just tell it to play closed. So how do I close this door that I'm currently on? Well, I can simply say sprite.play, and I'll be lazy here. I'll copy and paste that right there. And there we go. Should it all work? Let's go ahead and save. Control S. If you need to pause the video to get that all, please do. Be reminded that, of course, we have a variable at the top of our code in our door called sprite and teleport state, as well as all the other variables that we made. And in my physics process delta, we have the code that says, if I'm pressing up and I have the key and I'm over the door, play the open animation on this, the origin door, and start that timer. Whew, is it all going to work? Let's see. I'll press Control S to save. I'll go back to level 1. I'll look at my game and I'll press play scene. Let's see if it all works. If I go over the door and I press up, I get that rejection sound. If I go back and collect my key and then go back to the door, it unlocks, it opens, and I jump over to the other door. I am so relieved that that worked. Although if it didn't work for you, just go back and review all those little steps in the code, compare your code to mine, and see if it did work. To finish off this video, there are a few more steps. First of all, let's talk about sound. When you go up to the door, I'll restart my game level. When you go up to the door, it plays that little unlock sound right then. If you have the key, so it's now unlocked. If you didn't have the key, it would play that little rejection sound. But now we want to play a teleportation sound to make it more fun. So let's go back into our door scene and I will select the root node of my door. In fact, I'm going to go and select and duplicate one of my other sounds. So I'll just right click on one of them and say duplicate. I'm going to call this sound I'll delete sound locked and say sound teleport. And the sound that I'm going to use for sound teleport, I believe, is upgrade1.ogg in my sounds folder. I'll select that. I'll go to import. I will turn off loop. I'll re-import, and then I'll double click to show you what it sounds like and press play. That's a fun teleportation sound. One more time. Okay, so I'm going to go back to that node, sound teleport, and I'll drag in upgrade 1. That's no longer going to loop. And you can see it's kind of loud here. So I'm going to change its volume to -15 again, because it's quite loud. You can see its waveform here is quite big. So when is that actually going to play? Well, if I go back to my doors code and I maximize my code workspace here, there's two places that you could have it play. You could either go to your checker in your physics process delta and you could have it play right away. So when you press up and the door opens, you can have it play. I don't think that's quite right. I want the sound to play when you disappear and you actually start teleporting, which is in state 0 after the first 0.3 seconds. That's why I have this right here, that comment. So I'll get rid of that comment and I'm going to say $sound teleport dot play bracket. There we go. I'll save that. I'll go back to level 1. If you need to get that code, please do. But I'll go back to level 1 and I'll press play scene. So now if I go and collect the key and I go and unlock the door and press up, aha, it made that little teleportation sound. However, I have a little bug here. I also heard that little unlock sound, and I'm going to pause the video to see what's going on with that. Okay, there is one obvious thing that we need to do, and that is every time we are over the door and we're pressing up and we have the key, we need to, of course, start that timer process of our teleportation so it goes through all of these 5 different steps. However, every time you go over a door, either the first door or the other door, the target door, you want to restart that process from scratch. And because we have this variable in our code called teleport state, which needs to be at 0 every time you start the new teleportation process, we need to, when you press up and you have the key and you're over the door, we need to not only make the door open and start the teleportation process, we need to set that variable teleportation state or teleport state, we need to set it to equal 0 every time you do that. So it starts from 0 every time. If you don't, then it won't work properly and it won't go through these steps every time you want to teleport. Let's go and see how that works. If you need to pause the video to add that into the right spot in your code, please do. But I will save. Level 1 scene is active, so I'll press play scene. And let's see what happens. If I go and collect my key and go over the door, it unlocks. Aha, it worked. Except it's playing a little sound there. Why is that happening? I'm going to go ahead and pause the video and see what's going on. Okay, I think I know what it is. If I go ahead and press play scene again on level 1, you can see that when I jump over to the other door, the target door, listen to that sound. It's going to teleport and play that teleportation sound, but it's also going to play, I think it is the unlocking sound of the other door. So if I press up, you hear that? It played the teleportation sound and that little high-pitched chime. It's unlocking the other door because you are going into that unlock or near door zone for the first time. What I need to do here is make sure that when I press up to start the teleportation process, that I unlock the other door. And I do that automatically because I don't want to unlock it once I've jumped over to that spot. So right here, I'm going to open this door. I'm also going to say target.isLocked. Remember, that's my variable. That's on every door. I need to change it on my target as well. It's right here. I'm going to make it equal to false, like that. Why is that going to help? Because when I enter in to that door checker bigger area 2D around my door, which is this bigger zone right here, I want to make sure that I only unlock the door if the door is actually locked. That's not happening right now. So I needed to put that line of code in just now. I also need to say when I am near the door and I have the key, I actually only want to play the sound and unlock the door if I have not already unlocked the door. So I'm going to say if I have the key and not is locked, then I should unlock the door. If I have the key and it's already unlocked, I shouldn't play this, and this is going to unlock the other door so it doesn't play that sound and try to re-unlock it again. Let's go and see if that works. I will press Control S to save. Hopefully that made sense. If I press play scene and then go and collect my key and jump up and unlock the... Well, I hope you spotted my mistake just then. If I have the key and I want to unlock the door, I hope that it is locked, not locked. So if I have the key and is locked, so I just got rid of the word not right there. I'll get rid of it. I only need to unlock the door if it is locked and not if it's not is locked. Hopefully that makes sense. I will save that. I will go and press play scene. And if I go and collect my key and I go over the door, it unlocks because it was locked. And now if I press up, it works. And if I go back to this door and press up, it teleports. Hey, it's working pretty good. If I go away from that door and then go back to it later, does it work? It does. So we're doing pretty good. A few last things to look at before we finish off this video. And one of them is, well, what happens between the two doors while I'm teleporting? Well, if I press up and teleport, you'll notice, did you notice it? The camera zoomed across the screen. And I'll do that again. The camera didn't just jump to the next location, it slid across and it showed me all the parts of my level between door 1 and door 2. Why is it animating like that? Well, on my camera, I'll go back to level 2 and unmaximize my workspace. If I select my Steve's camera, my camera has this smoothing section, and I've turned smoothing on. Smoothing is great. You should have smoothing on your camera. It makes your camera act more smoothly, obviously. It makes your camera kind of have interpolation between where you are and where it is, so it doesn't just act very rigid on your screen. However, when you make your character jump and your camera has to follow your character, that causes a problem. How can we fix it? Well, if I go up here to this little dock button, when I have my camera 2D selected for my character, if I click this little dock button, it'll show me the documentation about this camera object and what kind of things you can do to it. It turns out that there are methods. There's a specific method in the camera 2D class. It is called reset smoothing. It's right here. And if I click on that, it'll jump me down into the documentation where it's right here. It says about reset smoothing, it sets the camera's position immediately to its current smoothing destination. In other words, it does not let the camera interpolate or move across your level to find where the character now is jumped to. It just, when you call this, makes your camera snap back to where it should be centered on the character. So in my doors code, what I need to do is call that on the camera of my character. How do I do that from my door? Well, this is my doors code. What I'm going to do here is say, right where I have this comment, remember I put the question mark after that. Do you want to do this? Well, we'll see. If I change this comment to get my player dot. Now, I don't have a pointer to my player's camera. So what I can just do here, I could make a pointer. I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to say player.get_node. This is a method that you can call to get any other node in your node tree by naming it by its name in a string. In this case, the camera is called on my character camera 2D, its default name. I wasn't very creative. Camera 2D. So when I've selected the camera now, that's what this does. I can say dot, and then what was that method called in the camera documentation? It's down here. It is called reset smoothing. So if I select my camera, which I've just done, and I say dot reset underscore smoothing. I have to type it correctly, of course, with brackets at the end. And I save that. Now, if I go and play my game level, and if you want to pause the video to get that code, please do. If I play this scene, level 1, and I collect my key, and I go through the door and teleport, you'll notice there was no more scrolling or interpolation. It just jumped the camera over to the player, and that's that. You might prefer it the other way. However, if I comment out this line, if I put a hashtag at the beginning or a pound sign at the beginning of this line to comment it out, and I go to my 2D scene and I move my other door, my target door, way over here, you may want to have, and I make sure that I turn snapping on and I make it against the ground perfectly. You may find that there's too much scrolling and it might actually reveal parts of your level that you want to remain secret. So if you're jumping between different sections and you don't want them to see how you got between those two parts, you will want to not have what happens right now. If I go and collect my key and then press up, you see how it quickly zoomed between those two locations? You might want to make sure it actually does call that reset smoothing method right there with that line of code. Okay, just a couple more little things to tweak about this. I'm trying to make this as perfect as I can for this video. What isn't going right in this game? If I save this code and go back to level 1 and press play scene, if I go and collect my key and I go up to my door and I press up, but then I immediately press right or left, I press right, you'll notice how, well, I died because while I was being teleported, I was walking. I'll walk to the left this time. You see how I kept walking even though I was invisible? How do I stop that from happening? Well, what I essentially need to do here is stop all player inputs. And the easiest way for me to do that is because I have in my character's code, I'll go over to my Steve code here, I have, in that earlier video in this series, set up a finite state machine with my match statement and my different behaviors. So if I'm in the air, my character behaves and can be controlled with all of this code. If my character is on the floor, all of this code applies. If my character is on a wall or on a ladder, we're going to make one more state in this character finite state machine. I'm going to go ahead into my enum of states, which is basically an ordered list of numbers, and I'm going to make a new state called frozen. And this will be helpful for other things that you might want to add into your game. In this frozen state, and I'll go ahead and I will add that into my match statement. So aligned up with my other states, states.air, states.floor, states.wall, states.ladder, I'm going to add one more state at the bottom of this match statement. I have to make sure that I line it up properly. So this one is 2 tabs away from the left. So this one will be 2. I'm going to say states.frozen, and I'll put a colon. How do I want my character to behave? What control should I have if my character is frozen? Well, I want nothing to be able to happen. I want my character to have no controls at all. So I'm just going to put a pass right there. And that means that there's going to be nothing in this block of code to control my character while they are in that state. And so you can't control your character. You can't move left and right. Once I have that, if you need to pause the video and get that code for yourself, please do. I simply added this 2 tabs away from the left here, and I added this frozen state into my states enum. Then I can go back to my door code, and I'm simply going to say, as soon as the door is opened, when I press up and I'm over the door and I have the key, I'm then going to say player dot, and I think it's just called state. Let's go back and check that in my Steve code. It is called state, and I want to assign it to states.frozen. So I'll copy that code, and in my door code, I'm going to say player.state, is going to be equal to states.frozen. And that needs to be all capital letters in my case. And of course, this states variable is in my player. So player.states.frozen. Hopefully it likes that. It seems to. Of course, when I am no longer being teleported, I need to make my character be in its floor state, because that's what my character has. If I go back to Steve, I have a floor state, and when you go through a door, you should end up on the floor, hopefully. So I'll go back to my door code. I'll copy this code, and I am going to, once I am actually visible on the other side at my destination or target door, I should then unfreeze myself by saying player state equals player.states.floor. And that way you are able to control yourself again. Let's go ahead and try that out. Of course, if you need to pause the video to get this line of code as well as this, assuming that you, of course, made the finite state machine along with me in that earlier video in this series. But I will save this. I will go back to level 1. I will press play scene. And so now if I go and collect the key and I jump up to the door and I press up and immediately left, I didn't keep walking while I was invisible. I'll do that one more time. I'll go back up to this door and press left, and I didn't end up kind of over here. I stayed on the door and I was only able to move left while I was actually visible. So it seemed to work. One more thing, I think, and that is if you happen to have a door that is on a platform where there are enemies, you might want to stop your enemies from killing you while you are in that mid state of being teleported. Because as soon as I do this, I go up to the door and I press up, I'm frozen there, and an enemy might hit me while I am there and vulnerable. So what I'm going to do here is in my door code, I am going to say, not only make me frozen, but take my player, so player dot set collision layer bit. That is a method you can call to change what layer your character is on. In my case, if I go back to my 2D scene and then unmaximize my workspace, he is on layer 1 right now, and that's how other objects can find him. However, if I turn this layer off just for a moment while he's teleporting, then nothing else can touch him. So I'll go back to my script and I will say set bit, and this is not the mask, this is his actual layer, his bit 0 to false. So now he won't be on any layer and nothing else can find him. However, when he goes back and he's able to move again, and if you need to pause the video to get that line of code in that spot, please do. But I've copied that code and I'm going to paste it and change it to true right down here. When I can see my character again, I want to make sure that I re-enable his bit 1 or layer 1 to true, like that. So layer 1 is bit 0, of course. So I'll press Control S to save. If you need to pause the video to get that code, please do. But I'll go to level 1. I'll press play scene. So now it should still work. I don't have any enemies that could intercept you while you're vulnerable there, but I'll press up. It seems to work. So I think we have it. I think we have a key that you can collect that shows up in your heads up display. You have doors in your game level that you can unlock only if you have the key. You can go up to a door, you can press up, you teleport to the other door, and of course you can put any amount of doors in your game level, because the way we've set this up with these targets and these pointers, when you have multiple doors, you don't have to have the same target on each door. So if door 1 goes to door 2, I could make it so that I have a door 3 as well, and door 2 might go to door 3 when you go through it, and door 3 might go back to door 1. You don't have to have them both go to each other. You can create quite an interesting dynamic and an interesting level with these teleporting doors. But that will be it for this video. As always, thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it all the way to the end of this video. As always, if you like this video or if you learned something in it, please go ahead and click on that like button below. It really helps out me and my channel, and it gets these videos more seen. If you want to see more videos like this one in either Godot or in Blender, go ahead and click on that subscribe button and that bell icon below as well. As always, check me out on Facebook and on Instagram. In those 2 places, I post sneak peeks and previews of what I'm working on next for this channel. But that'll be it for this video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.